Thank you so much for meeting with us tonight, Dr. Patricia Gerbarg and Dr. Richard Brown. You wrote the book, The Healing Power of the Breath, which is about to come out in Turkish. And a big yoga crowd is waiting for this book to come out. David and I both come from the yoga and meditation tradition into these practices. Just to introduce you a bit more to our audience, Richard, you are an associate professor of clinical psychiatry at Columbia University, and Patricia, you are an assistant professor at New York Medical College. Thank you again for being here tonight. I'd like to start with a question coming from my yoga background. Richard, you also studied martial arts and yoga, and David and I have studied in many different yoga systems. And the yoga poses and the breathing techniques that we learned were far more complex than the ones that you are teaching in this book. I know that I wouldn't have at that time been attracted to something so simple. Like my intellect was quite satisfied by the complexity of these practices. And so that drew me in and I practiced them. And I did start to awaken in my body and in my mind. However, I was also injured a little bit and it was very complex and difficult. So eventually they kind of left my life and I ended up doing things like what you're teaching. I sort of have a simpler practice now that's softer on my body, and the breath practices I do are softer. I'm curious, is there any opinion you have about eventually moving into a more complex practice, or do you think that is unnecessary? Can these simple practices provide all the benefits one would need? And does complexity add different benefits?
I think we both may have slightly different, but perhaps overlapping answers to that. So I started doing yoga when I was 9, and it was very beautiful, and it opened my eyes. And then when I was 12, I began doing Japanese martial arts. And I was required to do yoga as warm-up for martial arts. So I was prepared for that. And also to do some meditation and breathing. Now I was a boy, so it wasn't difficult. It was pretty simple. I then later began doing full contact Japanese karate, and breathing and meditation were absolutely required. And candle concentration meditation was required before the Zen practice. Okay, because if you didn't do that, you would get badly hurt. And then later I began doing Aikido, and Aikido is, I think, the most spiritual martial art in Japan, and breathing and meditation were definitely required. And I also then, that all started a long time ago. Around that time in the mid-80s, I began studying a style of Qigong that fused with a style of East Indian yoga, probably over 3,000 years ago. And it had the best of both. It was much too advanced for me to absorb. It was too complicated, but very beautiful. And so it wasn't until I met Pat and studied with a Qigong master here, a Taoist master, that I really began to learn Qigong. And then later on, a yoga guru contacted us from India, and I got very involved and ended up training and traveling and going. We went to many countries, including India, for significant periods and having transformational experiences. And then we found over time is that approach did not fit most Westerners. Most Westerners I know want to be happy and healthy, but they don't want a new religion. And I gave up on the Pope as being infallible when I was 10 years old. So I didn't want a new infallible person. We also started, I'll bring this together, ballroom dancing 30 years ago. So one more movement art that I've done. And what I noticed over those years, working with different teachers at different levels, is people reached a certain level where you just love learning new techniques and you love doing them. But when people get to a really high level, whether you're a famous ballroom dancer or a guru in yoga, you can take the simplest thing and open up this river of infinite energy that's so amazing, and you don't need the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the most famous gurus I met in India, they did 5 minutes of very simple asanas.
Mm-hmm.
They did some very simple breathing, and they did some chanting and meditation. And that was it. And our minds like to complicate things.
Yes, and maybe young people coming into an art like yoga or martial arts, maybe they need more distractions and they need to learn more. And then maybe as you get older, maybe with age, it changes.
I don't
Would you
know that
agree
it's
with that?
necessarily, I don't think it's just a matter of age. I think it's
Okay.
partly what you're interested in. So, I came to this with no background at all, and I really wasn't interested in many of the aspects that fascinated my husband. I came in as a clinician. I wanted to see how this could help my patients in their recovery, in their progress in therapy. And so for that, I was really looking for the simple, powerful, safe, and therapeutically the most effective practices, because when you're doing therapy, you only have a certain amount of time, and the client or the patient, the person who's coming to you for help, is only going to devote a certain amount of time to this. So
Sure.
I needed to be able to get, just as I work very efficiently as a therapist, I wanted this to be a very efficient practice because I knew that if we could develop it in that direction to be as simple as possible, easy to learn, safe for everybody, and yet rapidly very effective, then we would have something that many, many, many more people could benefit from.
Sure.
Because the vast majority of people are so busy, they can't go on yoga retreats, or they can't afford them.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the world is suffering so with anxiety and stress and depression. There's an epidemic of mental illness, or what you'd call ill health, just people who are so stressed out, that these techniques could be so beneficial. And if you make it complicated and it takes years to learn, it's not going to be of much use as a public health intervention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that was my emphasis. And I was very surprised. I had no expectations that these techniques would do what they do. It was a constant surprise to me to see how much people could respond. And we got it to a place where I could include it in my therapy sessions. It would take me 15, 20 minutes at the most to provide a breathing practice. And in those time, usually within 15 to 20 minutes, the person, perhaps with anxiety, would feel more relaxed and calm than they could ever remember feeling. That's when I knew
Amazing.
my patients were getting better and really able to use it. And it took years for us to develop this. We had to sort of sort through many different techniques and try many different things.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's not the same for everybody's different in what they need. But over the years, we were able to do this. And so I found that it's been adapted. We can adapt it to so many people, whether it's children. Now we're even working at the level of infants and mothers, all the way up. So it's really not a matter of age. We're very interested in special needs children.
Yeah.
So, it has to be simple if you're going to teach it to large numbers of people. And that's where you have the impact in our world.
And after 9/11, I felt that, we know there's still at least 400,000 people suffering from 9/11 and the World Trade Tower disaster. And I felt that the one healer, one client model doesn't work. And engaging the healing power of the group, even separate from the techniques, is valuable in itself. And we had to have something that everybody could do. And what I saw in India was I saw grandparents, parents, and grandchildren doing a whole practice together. and how important that is, how valuable that is.
So
But
I
it's got to be
think,
simple for everybody.
Yes.
Can I
Yes.
just,
Okay.
I
Sure.
think just for the benefit of the listener or watcher, the viewer, I think it might be good to name a couple of the practices. The primary practice is coherent breathing. Is that correct?
I'd say it's the core.
Yeah.
So, part of my experience in my training in different martial arts and in yoga, and looking at ancient texts in different countries, we were looking for things that appear independently in different countries and are maintained over thousands of years.
Yeah.
Because I feel that speaks to their value, and that it really is going to the foundation of our nervous systems.
Yeah.
And there's, for me, that it was catalyzed by being taken by a teacher in India to the Lakshmi Temple in New Delhi, which Gandhi designed. He was a Sanskrit scholar, and he had inscribed Hindi and English passages that he considered crucial. And one of them, and I'm paraphrasing it, went something like, first the movement, then the breathing, and then the meditation, and then the energy will rise in the spine and saturate the nervous system. And I'm like, that's how I've been taught. But in the West, it comes like very austere meditation, or very bland meditation, or complex breathing that disturbs a lot of people, or some people, or movement that's like athletic. It's like yuppie competitive yoga for the Olympics. And then you get injuries like crazy, but you're not going to the essence. So it's like making it simple.
And I like what you said, it goes to the foundation of the nervous system. So you're working on the hardware. So these techniques change the hardware, and then maybe the more complex things could be software that don't necessarily, maybe they don't add so much more, but they are unique to that person. They may be drawing that person, keeping them involved. A guru may keep that person dedicated and practicing, which is another thing we want to come to, is that people don't practice so much. I mean, David is an MBCT teacher, and I know that at Oxford, they're saying the main issue is...
Well, I think one of, not necessarily at Oxford, but one of the critiques of MBCT or any of these programs is people don't do the work. They might do a couple of practices a week, and then after 8 weeks, they don't pursue the practice. Yeah, and it's sort of a question of at what point does this practice become a default? Does it change the default state of the nervous system? Can that happen if someone was to engage in coherent breathing every day for 8 weeks? Would that then have a long-term impact upon the person's social engagement,
stress levels,
system? Would there be a healthier relationship between the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the nervous system? What's your experience on that, on practice and is this something that, I think one danger of these practices that we feel in order to be calm, we have to be doing a coherent breath. So we visit our in-laws, or we visit, we go to the office space, and suddenly we find ourselves breathing in for 6, breathing out for 6. I'm guessing the goal is to move beyond that somehow, so that rather than having to sort of invoke that in an acute moment of stress, that if we were to take this on as a practice for a certain amount of time, then it would just become more of a default response. Is there some logic in that?
Well, I think that first of all, obviously one size does not fit all. Okay, everybody's nervous system is in a different place and functions differently, and everybody is subjected to different degrees of stress, and everyone is different. So I don't think we should even try to make a generalization for what everybody should do or what everybody's goal should be. For some people, they're satisfied if they have a method that can help them whenever they feel anxious to calm down and be able to cope better. Or if they have trouble going to sleep at night, they are very grateful to have a technique that enables them to get to sleep. or if they have chronic pain, which breathing also can help. So it depends on the individual's motivation, what they feel they need. Okay. Now, for some people, and it's fascinating, for some people, and it's not just a matter of just breathing, because obviously we combine breathing with movement, and we also offer some different types of sort of interoceptive and space and body-oriented meditations and visualizations. And you can use the breath in many, many different ways. That's just sort of the first technique. But if that's all someone wants to do, that's all they want to do, and that's fine. If someone is really motivated to try to change the way their nervous system works, then they have to understand that's going to take more work. They're going to have to practice every day for longer periods of time, and so on. One of the great things about coherent breathing is that after people learn to do it with their eyes closed, then they can also do it with their eyes open, which means that they can do it wherever they are at the moment. And it's private. Nobody knows you're just sitting there quietly breathing. It also means it opens up a lot more time, because there's a lot of time during the day when you're just sitting and waiting or doing things where you can be doing the coherent breathing simultaneously. So in that way, you can do it a lot more of the time without losing time out of your busy day. So they're, you know, it's very flexible as to how people use it and what they choose to use it for, depending on what their needs are.
So part of it is, I feel like if people do a round or two of breathing in a day, their whole nervous system, their mind, body, spirit complex is shifted and becomes more flexible and more like a child's again. And in terms of that process of the transformation happening, I tell people, for most people, it'll take about 3 to 12 months of practicing daily, pretty much. You know, some people do it 5 days a week. It seems to work fine. But I'm like, if you go to the Olympics, how many of the silver and bronze people do you remember compared to the gold? And there's about this much difference between them, usually in most events. So it's like, go for the gold when you're doing it. But it takes some months. And what happens after you do it a while is that you realize you're becoming a different person. You're reacting and processing things very differently. And it's effortless. And when stress happens, your lungs start doing the breathing. It's not like you say, oh, I better do my breathing now. No, it's like most of the time you don't need to if you've done a round of it in that day. But when you need it, your lungs literally start doing it. And you're like, my God, my body knows. And it's doing it. And I remember we were about a year ago teaching therapists for wounded Marines, both physical and emotional injuries. And one of the coaches came in 3 days into the training and said, I got stuck in this large traffic jam on the way to the base today. And I started doing the breathing. My lungs started doing it. He said, wow, that's really amazing. And I'm like, I've never met a person who did it in 3 days. He was so physically talented.
Right.
He got it that fast. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one famous yoga teacher we know who he has now a watch or a Fitbit. I can't remember which. I'm not very techy. It reminds him every 6 seconds to take in or give out a coherent breath.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. You know, and when my Aikido master, who also taught me this, says I've had different teachers teach me. And because they only made me do it for 5 minutes at a time, I'm like, well, I don't feel any different. You got to practice it for a while over time to understand there's a change. But what he says is, this is a development breathing. It develops your system in multiple ways, and you won't realize it at first. It may feel like nothing's happening.
The other thing that we found, because we've done, you know, quite a few clinical studies, and especially in people who have gone through some sort of a mass disaster and are left with a severe PTSD and that sort of situation. And it's so variable, or people who've had childhood trauma or sexual abuse. You know, we've had situations where the first day that the person does our program, within that first day, they suddenly have a transformative experience, and the traumatic aspect of their experience is completely cured and permanently. whether they
Amazing.
practice or not.
Mhm.
Then there are other people, same thing. They have some symptom from sexual abuse or whatever, and when they do their breathing, it goes away. But if they skip their breathing one day, their symptoms start to come back. So as long as they do their breathing 20 minutes a day, they have no symptoms. And then other people who have to practice it for 9 months, and then they have a transformative experience, and the sexual trauma from their childhood, the effect is completely gone.
Wow.
And it's as though the whole system resets to what would be for them a normal state of mind. It's fascinating. So we're constantly investigating and trying to understand how it affects so many different aspects of the mind.
Yes.
Can I ask, Patricia, I also work as a therapist here in the UK, and I'm curious how you integrate these practices into your therapy practice. Is it within the context of a session? Is it as a homework? Yeah.
So in a session, I will teach the person how to do perhaps coherent breathing, also called resonant breathing, during the session, and give them access to a breath pacing audio track. And then they go home and they're supposed to practice it once a day or twice a day if they're very severe, using their audio track, pacing their breathing. And when they come in the next week, I ask them how it went, just as if I had tried a new medication, and see how it went and what problems they had. We'll address those, and then they'll continue to practice at home. Occasionally, I'll have someone who has such a severe problem and the individual work isn't enough, and they really need a more intense experience. And in that case, I'll have them referred in to take our Breath, Body, Mind program. That's a 12-hour intensive where they do rounds of movement, breathing, and meditation all through the day. And usually that's enough to trigger the change to begin to happen. And then they come back into the session and we talk about it. Many times we'll use it during the session. Some people have PTSD trauma, and if they try to talk about it, it makes them so anxious that they can't. So I'll have them do a little coherent breathing to calm down, and then they can talk about it in the session. And we'll use it for different symptoms because they often have physical symptoms, and we can relieve the physical symptoms using the breathing with some other techniques. So there are many, many different ways to use it in treatment.
Physical symptoms, they can, what would those physical symptoms look like? And I think what you're saying is that they can be completely exercised, or the body, they can depart, they can no longer present themselves.
Because when people are traumatized, usually there's both a physical and a psychological component to the trauma. And when that happens, the physical and the psychological become linked. And it's very hard to treat either one. You have to deal with both. When they do the breathing, what happens, it seems to unlink the physical and the psychological trauma so that you can resolve both. An example would be, say, temporal mandibular joint pain would be one example. Another would be a pelvic pain syndrome. Another would be a choking sensation. The person was choked during their abuse. And another would be, for example, a numb feeling, a dissociative feeling where they can't experience a part of their body at all. And all of these things over time.
Or it might be diffuse joint achiness.
It could be many, many
or
different
pressure
things.
sensitivity.
Yeah. So when we work on that, then the
I have
physical as
questions
well as
also.
the emotional improve.
I want to just follow
Okay.
up on these pieces, which one piece is that the breath seems to have, like, just that interest, cultivating that interest in the breath seems to be part of it. I've been practicing breath meditation for 20 years now. And one of the things I can recognize is that it develops a capacity for interoception.
Exactly.
And another piece is that the breath itself is very beautiful. I think this is sometimes an overlooked part of meditation, that it can be deeply pleasurable, enjoyable. there can be a very subtle and deep reorientation towards something that's deeply pleasurable, or intrinsically pleasurable. And I just wonder, would that also be your experience of the breath?
Well, again, that my husband and I are sort of into it for different things. He would probably be more in that direction. I'm very clinically and practical in my orientation. If I find something that's going to help my patients with the things that they want to accomplish in their self-healing with my assistance, then I'll pursue it. So that's probably not on their wish list, what you're describing, at least not at this point. I think the point about interoception is very important. Interoception is the perception of sensations and signals from inside our bodies. And in people who have anxiety disorder, depression, autism spectrum, trauma, in all of these conditions, there are dysfunctions in the interoceptive system, in how the signals come from our body to our brain and vice versa. Now, breathing is fascinating because when we breathe, we are setting off sensory receptors throughout our respiratory system, as well as inducing changes in the body chemistry. And there are sensors for that too. So when we change our pattern of breathing, we change the pattern of millions of bits of messaging, interoceptive messages going to the brain. And now it's known that these messages are going to all the major brain regulatory areas, including areas involved in emotion and memory and thinking. That what happens in our bodies affects how we think and feel and behave and judge things. So we can take advantage of the fact that we can voluntarily change our pattern of breathing, and a huge input. And if we can understand the language of the lungs, in other words, what breathing patterns will send the messages we want, that's potentially going to have tremendous impact.
And this is very different from what you do, which is watching the free breath. So here we're talking about a manipulation of the breathing rhythm, which is going to make these changes versus the, Zen.
Can I come in with one more question
Okay,
just to complete this
Let me
piece?
Okay,
And
okay.
then,
because I recently read a fascinating article. There's a lot of interest now in interoception. This would then be called an interoceptive intervention or manipulation. We're
Okay.
working with the interoceptive system to heal ourselves. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So for me, one of the important things is in the early 90s, Paul Lehrer, a psychologist in New Jersey, worked with Japanese researchers at 3 famous traditional Zen monasteries. And they measured what was happening with the monks as they meditated. And they had the abbots rate the monks as advanced or not advanced. In Japan, you don't have different gradations typically with things. It's like either you're advanced at something or you're a beginner. Okay. And what they saw is the monks rated as advanced had all been meditating for 20 or more years for at least 8 hours a day.
Oof.
And what they saw was the advanced monks, when they began to meditate, they all went into coherent breathing. They didn't understand it and they didn't know the meaning of it at the time, but people who've been doing it 10 to 20 years were not in the same place. And that's the Northern tradition. Whereas in the Southern tradition, regulating the breath is important. People say to me, well, it's no good if I'm regulating the breath. And I'm like, well, do you have 8 hours a day for the next 20 years? And your body will discover it.
That you might as well start now.
You might as well, my feeling is that's first base. And you have more bases to go after that. It's like, I don't know any Westerners that want to take that time and do it the old-fashioned way. And I feel it's the same with meditations. It's like people develop different traditions of how they did breathing or meditation or movement. And they gradually recapitulate it. Every generation teaches exactly the same steps. And my feeling is we don't have that kind of time in our cultures. We're not going to spend that kind of time.
Yes.
And we need to use both looking at what overlaps in the ancient traditions and what the advanced people do. So in yoga, the yoga practice of breathing, well, Iyengar's book says you don't teach them breathing for 10 years. They just do asanas, okay? And then, you know, basically what I'm saying is you can do a lot of different things, but in yoga, they did slow breathing, which is great. It's very relaxing. It really increases the parasympathetic tone, but don't ask anybody to be doing algebra or differential equations at the end of a slow round of breathing. Whereas with coherent breathing, your mind is working, everything in several different labs that's measurable in any system works optimally after a round of coherent breathing, which means it's great for your everyday life. And to me, that's the default mode. In China, they studied and wrote things down and kept better records than in India.
Okay.
And what they said was, people come because they're suffering, and generally they have an excess of yang energy, which is the sympathetic branch of the autonomic system, and they have a deficiency of yin. And first you do slow breathing, and then when they're intermediate, you teach them fast breathing. So that slow breathing might take at least 3 years in the ancient Chinese way of doing it. Except like the first style of fused yoga, Qigong, I was exposed to, coherent breathing was the foundation for very advanced practices after that. Because you could learn them easily if you practice the breathing a lot for the first month.
And for that reason, is coherent breathing, I'm wondering also, Patricia, in your therapy, would you ever look at someone and say, actually, this person needs a practice that would elevate sympathetic tone? Because I get the feeling that coherent breathing, it's special, what it excels in is sort of down-regulating sympathetic tone and sort of bumping up parasympathetic, or is it more to bring a regular?
It brings them up and balances them reciprocally together.
Okay.
So also in the ancient systems, they conceived of the masculine energy was more on the in-breath and the feminine energy on the out-breath. And they're not syncing well. They're more antagonistic or oppositional than complementary and mutually reciprocal. And they realized in China, advanced people did coherent breathing. And that it balanced those energies, but it also raised them together.
So their yin yang was balanced, and their, you know, Ida Pingala, or however esoteric way you want to say it. So coherent breathing is balancing these inner energies within us.
Right.
Go ahead.
It reminds me of John Kabat-Zinn taking mindfulness and really stripping it of the Buddhism and presenting it in a medical setting, you know, taking the gist of it and saying, how can I make this available to the masses? I mean, when you describe what you're doing, it really sounds to me just like yoga. It really does, like a beautiful, gentle, aware movement with a nice, long breathing and a meditation. But you've taken away the word yoga or the esoteric, and you're presenting it in a clinical setting. So this is
with the scientific basis, and also trying to use science to develop it more clearly and more effectively. But I remember, you know, I taught in so many cultures. So I found when I was a yoga teacher, and I would go to the southern part of the United States where the Christianity is, let's call it very muscular, okay? And if the term yoga, or if India or China was ever mentioned, he would say, doctor, I can't do your breathing because it comes from pagans, from heathens. And of course, this is also been practiced in Sufism and Kabbalah in Jewish mysticism, the same stuff. And I found that difficult because I feel like until this is acceptable to everybody of any background, whether any religion or no religion, in all cultures, we're not going to change how we're killing ourselves and the planet. Okay. And I remember teaching in Africa. The first time I went to South Sudan, a philanthropist took me, and I also took a yoga teacher who's really good, very experienced, and he's real yoga, but he never complains. And in South Sudan, that's what I wanted. Okay. So we get there and we're working with 35 mental health professionals who want to bring this to 12.5 million people, all of whom have PTSD.
Yeah.
And we were teaching them for about 3 or 4 days, hours a day. And I said to them, by the way, how do you all feel about yoga? And all their heads like snapped to look at me and they go, we hate yoga.
Yeah.
And I've been to other countries in Africa. I say, how do you all feel about yoga? And they're like, we hate yoga. And it's like, I said to them later, I said, I'm glad we didn't ever use the word yoga here. I had no idea that they were going to hate it. And
It's
so
the
we've
most
taken it to
loved and
something
most
natural.
hated. Yeah. It's
And
wonderful.
People
Yeah.
say to me, well, we do movements like that. And we do something of breathing a little bit like that. I'm saying, all this stuff is really natural. I'm taking this back to when you were a child and you were happy and safe. And this is how you did this.
And the other things that are a little bit different, I think, we use breath as the center. So we use breath with movement. We use it with meditation, with body scans, in every aspect.
Okay.
And also, you have different effects depending on how you teach it. And there are subtleties to that. So if you give, 10 people an app to pace their breathing, even if it's at the same rate, they'll all breathe differently. Some people will breathe intensely, some people will breathe gently, some people, and so we've tried to really look at the finer points as to how you optimize the effects you're trying to get by those subtle aspects of how you're actually doing the breathing, not just that you're pacing it. Because all these things make a difference in the effects that you have.
Sure.
And also for me, teaching around the world, I would not just ask or survey people what they felt, I would observe their behavior. And when we got this program together, I found that people would start smiling more. They'd start touching each other affectionately but appropriately. They'd joke and laugh, and they'd be a lot freer in their movement. Okay.
Yeah, because what we're interested in all the different systems, including the social engagement system, which we also use some principles of polyvagal theory, and we believe that the techniques as we teach them are activating the social engagement system, and then we enhance that through some of the other methods that we use in our workshop, so that people have a connectedness, a feeling of meaningful connection to themselves, to other people, and to the world. And this is so much needed today.
It's so wonderful. It's very exciting what you're doing. I'm really amazed at how you have brought it, and your book is also very easy to read and in different sections addressing all different sorts of people with different backgrounds. One of them interested me, one anecdote about in Toronto, you worked with this START mood altering clinic. And you say, some of the people who were suffering there, they weren't as affected from MBCT, CBT, and medication as they were affected by Sri Sri Ravi Shankar's Kriya Yoga. Like there was some sort of quick, short test. And then what you guys did was you took Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, the positive effects of that, but you made the learning method shorter again and the practices easier. And then there were the same results or positive results again from your practices? Yeah,
they were just as good. And we reduced the program from a week program down to 2 days.
2 days, okay.
But one of the problems was the people said, we just can't come that many hours. We can't come that many days.
Okay.
And also there were some techniques in the Sudarshan Kriya program that we felt were not safe for everyone, for vulnerable individuals. And many people come to our programs who have serious psychiatric mental health issues, because if there are 2 psychiatrists there, or other psychiatrists who know us and their patients. So we have to be very cautious and not use techniques that will trigger adverse reactions. And we saw quite a few situations where people doing some of the techniques in Sudarshan Kriya Yoga had terrible reactions. Some people who even had to be hospitalized because they decompensated after doing those practices. So we eliminated all of those practices that we felt weren't safe from our program, and we got just as good results. So
This is
Yeah,
amazing.
it might take
This
a
is
little
really
longer
amazing.
sometimes, but it
Yeah.
was gentler and less violent. And the other thing is, because I got known about lecturing about this and teaching, even while I was still teaching for Art of Living, is people would sneak up to me after a presentation and say to me something like, I did this Kundalini breath of fire, or I did this holotropic breathing, or I did this shamanistic breathing, and I was psychiatrically hospitalized and I've never been the same since. Can you help me?
Oof.
And,
Wow.
you know, it's like, yeah, we can repair people, but the best thing is to prevent that from happening.
when it got out that there were 2 psychiatrists who were kind of in the yoga world, we started getting phone calls from yoga teachers all over
I
all
can
over the
imagine.
world. And I even had to deal with a crisis through a translator with somebody who was in trouble in, I won't name the country. I mean, there are a lot of adverse reactions going on, and we try to, that was one of the things we try to educate people in the yoga world about possible adverse effects and working with more vulnerable populations to try to reduce that.
Because the way yoga is taught now, it's taught to everyone. You know, it's easy to become a teacher. And these advanced techniques are being just dealt out really carelessly in a way.
Yeah.
So this is quite serious then.
Right. Sometimes the reactions will occur during the session. For example, if you have someone with panic disorder breathe rapidly, you could trigger a panic attack right like that. Or someone with severe PTSD, you could trigger flashbacks. But sometimes the reactions occur as a delayed reaction after the session, maybe that evening or the next day.
Or 3 days later or 7 days later.
Somebody with bipolar.
Oh my God.
disorder,
I urgently need your workshop, because I teach people online, you know, thousands of people. And this is very serious what you're saying. And we have to be,
right. And what
yeah.
happens is the yoga teacher, the person just doesn't come back, and they never know what actually happened to
Never
them.
know. Yeah.
Meanwhile, I get a call from a nearby hospital, you know, this college student was in this breathing program and now they're here, you know, what happened?
Oh my God.
And this is not just a single case. This is something that happens. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is that pregnant women should not do certain breathing practices. Okay, they should not do any breath holds, because it's been found that repeated breath holds reduce the oxygen to the baby.
Oh my God.
No forceful rapid breathing. I mean, all these things, you know, and if you're putting something out there online, we feel it's important to make people aware, you know, if there's anyone pregnant, for example, please don't do breath holds. Don't do the intense breathing, you know.
Are the adverse effects primarily associated with breathing practices where the breath is held, and when there's sort of, I could imagine a practice like Kapalabhati was a rapid
Kapalabhati especially.
Anything that
That's the most frequent problem.
The pressure
Really?
inside, you don't want, or forceful movements, you don't want.
But just, you know, people doing Kapalabhati, especially very fast Kapalabhati right away, can become manic or dissociated or have flashbacks that undo them. And, you know, or a crazy example, I taught a colleague, Sudarshan Kriya, which is 3 cycles of different rhythms of Kapalabhati. And a week later, he had a seizure driving. And when he was a young man, he traveled throughout North Africa and got cysticercosis of the brain. It's a parasite that attacks the brain from uncooked, not fully cooked lamb. And I think the breathing reactivated it.
Wow.
He had been treated for it, but it obviously wasn't all wiped out. So people sometimes have seizures after fast breathing.
Well, even just with regular epilepsy, you can trigger it.
Yeah, you can trigger epilepsy with it. So, all these things are careful. It's one thing doing a large group because people don't know what they're vulnerable to, or they don't want to tell you. They won't give you their
No,
medical
they
psychiatric
won't.
history.
Yeah.
It's another thing working with a client over time, one-on-one.
And I think now that people are teaching online, you have even less information. If you were in the room with someone and they began to have a problem, you would be right there. But distance, virtual, they might be alone in their apartment somewhere and have a reaction like this. So we really have to be responsible and do no harm when we're trying to do good for people.
Have you gotten a reaction from other, the yoga world, or from doctors or other medical people or scientists? Because what you are doing is you have a little bit of both. It feels like there's a spiritual background to what you're doing. I mean, you talk about deep prayer being awakened from coherent breathing. And we know that you have a spiritual practices, many of them. How do people react to you and your book in both worlds, both the spiritual world and the scientific world?
Well, it's just what I said before, that, there's such a range. Tens of thousands of people have bought the book and loved it, and we get emails from all over the world as to how much people are helped by it, thanking us and wanting to learn. So, those are obviously the people who like it. The people who are not interested, obviously it's selected out, they don't read it. We've worked for many, many years, decades, to try to introduce more of an understanding of the potential therapeutic benefits into mainstream medicine. And so in addition to the popular books, we do research studies, we publish scientific articles, we lecture at conferences, and there will be 50 or 100 physicians may attend our programs because they're interested. The other 1,000 or 10,000 who were at the conference who don't attend, obviously they think it's more important to learn more about medication or something else.
Right.
So it's still a minority, but it's a growing minority. And I think now there'll be hopefully more interest and pressure, because the enormity of the need for mental health services is so far beyond. I mean, it's just too expensive to try to treat everyone primarily with medication, although many people do need that. And the one-on-one model Dr. Brown spoke of, we're going to be forced, for financial reasons, if nothing else, to be more serious. And you see more and more organizations are looking for these practices. Even the Veterans Administration in this country is now open to these practices. They don't always know which ones are best or how to do it, but at least something that would have been unthinkable, 10 years ago, people are looking at. So I think that it's something that's going to grow.
But I feel one of the problems with psychiatry and medicine is it focuses on the negatives. My feeling is our system does have some healing capacities. I'm not saying you can heal everything or anything, but all the way. But I see us as helping people focus on the positive things that they can do, and we're empowering them and giving them tools that have been used for thousands of years to turn on self-healing processes. And for example, in a course where the more breathing we do, and there are different ways to get people to do it. And so breathing is an austere practice. And a lot of people find it really hard doing a lot of breathing. It doesn't feel good, it's boring. At first, they don't realize what's happening. And I feel like when we do a course, so I get breathing in any way I can, including they do very simple joint mobility or joint loosening, which is very similar throughout Asia, whether it's yoga, qigong, or Siberia or Russia. And they do the breathing with it and move the breath at the same time. And those are the courses where the next day we come in and so many people come up and go, oh my God, I started feeling these changes happening in my body overnight. And it's this coherent breathing is so gentle and so natural. So in that style of fused yoga qigong from 3,000 years ago, they called it natural breathing. They felt it was our natural breathing. But we're so stressed, it doesn't feel natural. We're addicted to stressful thoughts and ways of living. And you have to slowly detoxify people from that.
Mm-hmm.
I think also making it fun. We always have fun in our workshops. People love it. We dance, we have dancing with the movements, we have music. And in our children's programs, there are different games that you can play as you learn to breathe. You know, you have to make it palatable for people.
Wonderful. I'm just wondering if
we have
can-
5
yeah,
more
also
minutes.
we can edit some stuff, but I'm just
Okay.
wondering if I watched a couple of other videos where you presented coherent breathing. I'm wondering if it's for a few minutes because that's something we might also be able to put it on package it separately. Yeah. And you know, then say, look, come buy the book, learn these practices. Might be worth doing it if that's.
I think the other thing is that we don't only teach coherent breathing. That's not the only breathing practice.
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't want it to sound like that's all we think people need. So I don't know how you want to also maybe talk for a few minutes about that we do a sequence of different types of breathing practices.
Okay, so then maybe.
And we think ideally the sequence can be important for the person. Again, movement with conscious breathing, then breathing, and then attention training, which is a way of saying meditation.
Okay.
Becoming aware for a healthier person, becoming aware of the space inside us and around us. And whether it was in Ayurveda or in China, the 5 elements were important, and space was the most important element they realized, even though our ordinary minds don't make it that way. So we really want to, whether people know it or not, begin to shift how their system is processing this reality we share in a more healthy, transformative way. In terms of doing a practice, we could do a practice. CUNY TV did a great documentary on us a few years ago. You might want to look at it.
Okay.
Because it's about 10 minutes of the science in a clear way that most people can understand. And then I teach the journalists 3 kinds of breathing, one of which is coherent breathing. And I have teachers, all they teach is coherent breathing, and they get great results with extremely traumatized people. But I feel like it does help to have some other tools if people can take the time to learn those things. And also what I've seen in practice over the years, if people do these things, they're less likely to get physically ill. If they do, they're likely to heal better with less medicine and less treatment. And to be able to manage that medical illness a lot better. And there are some, one of our teachers in London is working with doctors. They're getting data along those lines too. So all of the healthcare systems all over the world are strained. And we really need to engage people. And also one of the problems in medicine is the typical thing is the doctor or nurse tells the patient what to do. It doesn't work well. And what seems to work well, or at least better, in England is you have a group of peers come together and people know what they should do, but they're more likely to do it if a friend they respect helps them do it and talks about it with them. They wouldn't do it on their own. But sharing it in a group helps you get with what you need to do.
Yes. I think that if we do a practice, it's like if it's for Turkish people, they're going to have to read the subtitles. Do you know what I mean? It's not going to be, I think, the best thing to do a practice now, especially if we have that in a documentary.
Take a look at that, because you might be able to, it might fit with what you're thinking of. There's a good chance it would. And you could translate it. And
the other thing we could do is, we're doing a conference on Sunday, and in that conference,
on Saturday.
I'm sorry,
for the Turkish part on Saturday.
Oh, the Turkish part on Saturday, yeah. I'm doing a lecture, and then
with Olgu,
So maybe they would let you have a little clip of him teaching coherent breathing, and we
Yeah.
don't have simultaneous translation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, that might be
perfect,
better, David. Yeah,
perfect. And then Zeynep can share that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can we end with a question? Do you
Yeah,
have
of
any more
course.
questions, David?
No, I have.
Like
I'd like to say something at the end, but I don't have any
Okay.
more questions.
Well, this was your question, was,
Which
and
question is
it ties in the vision of how this is to be taught. So people, like you just mentioned, Richard, they want community to practice with. I mean, all these old traditions, always in monasteries or ashrams, people always practice together. And it's so hard for us to just sit at home and expect ourselves to practice. What do you envision? I know you're working in different clinics and you want schools to be applying this. Do you have a vision that you'd like to talk about of how you would see
Well,
this?
I think it's clear that the thing that keeps people practicing usually is being part of a group of people they share it with and have a community of. And part of what the research about our social bonding system shows is we are at our best connected to other people. And even better when we're all in balance together. and the other thing is part of that is that I see that's related to one of the questions you asked is when people do this without saying it explicitly, it wakes up an interest in people in spiritual things, which to me is a sense of connection to something bigger than your ordinary self. And it's just part of how we're wired. And archaeology is showing people were doing this group stuff for at least 40,000 years. I think it's probably more. And we need new rituals. And that's part of what the researcher in Canada said to me. He said, all this stuff is coming together in North America, and you need to put it together in a way that feels right for people from all over the world. And each tradition has special things about it. And so we wanted to bring it together in a way that felt right for people. And it depends on the person, what that spiritual practice might be. Some people say, I went back to church and it was so vibrant and real, and I really enjoyed it, and I used to hate it. Or one patient I had, she said, you know, I have so little time. I'm a widow. This was when she was in her about 50. I'm a widow. I'm working and I have an autistic child. I can't go do stuff in a group, but I found this book of spiritual sayings and I read just a couple of sentences before I go to sleep at night. And it really helps me. And she wasn't interested in that until she did the breathing and was doing the breathing regularly.
Okay.
That somehow when we're systems in balance, the desire for connection with something bigger just naturally comes up. And it's different ways for different people. And I don't have an agenda as to what it is.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. But you're there. Yeah.
I think we have some choices, more choices than we used to. It used to be that, you know, people would have to try to find a time and a space and travel to get together in their group, whatever. But now with the internet, we have converted all of our programs online. And so now we have some of our teachers are offering weekly or bi-weekly practice sessions at different times of the day. So anyone can log on and participate in a group practice session. And some of them are at a time of day that's convenient for Europe, and some are a time of day that's convenient for the US or Australia, wherever. And people, that's the thing that surprised us. When we had to convert to online, I was worried, how are we going to make this an interpersonally meaningful experience online? And it turned out that it was fine. People loved it. And in fact, in some ways, they felt it was more personal because you could see people in a different way.
Yes.
And so they got very connected to the groups that they practiced with, and they wanted to get together, which is fine. So now people can form communities and groups to practice together online conveniently. You don't even have to travel anywhere, or you can go and take a group practice with a teacher to guide you and help you progress and develop further. So we now have all these options we didn't have before, which is very exciting, especially for the public health end of things.
I agree. And You know, just before we close, I wanted to also say thank you. And just to, you know, the reason that we arrived here was because I was writing my thesis for university, and it was on, part of it was on polyvagal theory, and I had written to Dr. Stephen Porges, and he had recommended that I read your book on the healing power of the breath. And then I picked it up, and I was every morning for almost 1 year. I do a lot of mindfulness groups, meditation groups online, just sitting in silence or doing different practices. And I was so affected by also the simplicity of the book, but also the power of it was very inspiring to read the book, and the different, it resonated with me that there was an evidence base, that it really was rooted in the contemplative tradition. Somehow and it seemed very clinical application, very immediate. And I started to introduce coherent breathing before the meditation I would only do it for like 6 or 7 minutes. But it was, and we did that for almost 1 year following. We would do that for 6 or 7 minutes with a group, and then we would do a breath meditation, but just a very open awareness type Zen practice. And I found it profoundly effective and beautiful. And yeah, so, and then Zeynep sort of picked up on that and started to share it with the Turkish audience. And here we are today. The rest is history.
Yeah, no, well,
Amazing.
we're certainly glad, and we love sharing it with people. You know, it's interesting. Moving the breath, for example, is a more advanced technique. And I remember, you know, we felt that if people, for example, got an advanced track of this stuff, they wouldn't understand it, and they would feel badly that they couldn't do it. And I remember I got a call from a woman. She said, "I have to come to your courses." I said, "Well, why is that?" She said, "Well, someone gave me a CD of you're leading this breath moving thing, and I took it to my Buddhist meditation group, and we were all like in heaven, and we want to come and practice." And I thought, I guess it depends on where you're starting. You know, if you're ready for it, it's like totally fine. And for me, doing traditional Zen for years before doing breathing, I reached a point where I would do Zen and I would feel like I was a bottomless ocean. And then when I first learned breathing, more sophisticated breathing, I felt like a bottomless ocean of joy. And I said, I got to meet the guy who developed this. And some years ago, maybe 5, 6 years ago, we were presenting at a conference in Amsterdam, and there were 2 Tibetan lamas there from their tradition using very advanced meditation and breathing. And I walked into the room they were in, and we looked at each other and we were like, oh, got to talk to him. And I went over, and one of them spoke fluent English. He was a young man, like 33, and speaks numerous languages. And the other guy was 82, only speaks Chinese or Mongolian, or Tibetan rather. And but once we looked at each other, we knew we had a similar understanding. And I said to the younger monk, I said, so what would you say is the goal of all your practices? You have so many advanced meditations, you have many kinds of breathing. And he said, bliss with emptiness. And that's what I feel we're trying to give people who come from a more, practiced meditative tradition, is emptiness with bliss. And the breathing helps kind of them both. And I feel with meditation, you can get the emptiness, but the breathing really helps get the bliss too. And, it just affirmed what we were doing. Some years ago, after we developed it, Pat found an article in an Indian journal about an ancient practice from a text. It's called Santi Kriya. And they did a very simple study. They took 8 beginners, never done any yoga or meditation or anything. And they taught them the practice, which was doing some simple movement, doing the movement with breathing, doing the breathing, and then doing the kind of meditation that we teach, going into the awareness of space, inside you and outside, and also focusing on the sensory organs, just taking your consciousness to those organs. And what they saw was, at the end of a month, all of them had exactly the same brainwaves as yogis who'd been practicing for hours a day for decades. And my feeling is we need to help people get to that state.
Faster, yeah.
And also giving it to children at an early age. They're so stressed and they don't know how to release the negative emotions. And we need to give them tools right away. At least in America, the suicide rate in young children, in young adults, is incredibly high, like never before. And so we need
there's
to
urgency. There's an urgency,
about
and we're also there. I mean, we're also feeling it in Turkey, and we have a similar vision to reach as many people as possible with the safest, most effective breathing techniques. And you know, I'm so happy to be taking your course to learn in depth. Yeah.
Just before we end, how can people find you?
Our website is breath-body-mind.com, or they could just Google us. And also we have a lot of videos. You can find us on YouTube. We've done some lectures on HealthFlix, HealthFlix. On our website, we have lots of videos. People can hear us give lectures and also see us teaching the practices. We
people
have
can
a
train with you.
page, a lot of resources there. And of course, there's a listing of our workshops and programs as well on our website. So,
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for taking time to be with us and answer our questions. Yeah, I could talk for another hour, but
well, hopefully we'll have more conversation.
hopefully, yeah.
We got to work together. I mean, one of my dreams for a while, and also one of our teachers in London, is the idea of having major cities around the world have a day of breathing at the same time together, and then letting it diffuse from there also. So the breathing puts people in meditation. So many people come to me going, "Don't teach me meditation. I hate meditation." I say, "I'm not going to teach you meditation. I'll teach you breathing." And 3 to 6 months later, they can learn any kind of meditation they want.
Yeah.
Because the breathing shifts the brain to be flexible to do